You know that 90% of boys and 70% of girls are exposed to pornography online? Meanwhile, 71% of kids say that they're hiding internet activity from their parents. In 56% of divorce cases today, a major contributing factor is one spouse's continued use of inappropriate content online. What are you doing to protect your family online? Covenant Eye's Internet Accountability monitors how the internet is used on your family's mobile devices and their computers. Each web page visited is rated similar to TV shows or video games, like T for teen or M for mature. This information is collected in easy-to-read reports, and as a parent, you can receive weekly reports for your kids. Plus, you can invite your friends to receive reports for your internet activity, which enables you to enjoy the benefits of accountability and protection online as well. These reports provide you with a comprehensive view of how the internet is used in your home. They include information like the videos that are watched and words typed into search engines. Are you looking for additional protection? Covenant Eyes also provides internet filtering, which blocks inappropriate content and limits the amount of time spent online. Install Covenant Eyes on all your devices, your computers, phones, and tablets. There's no extra charge, and we provide free customer support. It's that simple. Sign up today. It's your turn to protect yourself and your family online.
Hey, how are you? Doing good? Yeah.
Hey.
Man, I'm glad to be. It's going to be good.
Yeah, it is.
Looks like you've got quite the setup here.
Yeah, well, we're trying. So you have to see it behind the scenes. It looks a little messy. So hopefully it looks good on your end.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Looks really good. Can you hear okay? Does it sound okay?
You sound great. Yep. So appreciate it. We just wanted to ask you a few questions. I mean, your experience, your passion. One of the things that we just of course read your bio, but your experience goes from East Coast to West Coast to Midwest. Deal with young people, older generations, leadership. You're investing in younger pastors and leaders. You deal with even the business sector as well. So you just have a vast portfolio, which I'm sure some days you're like, how many hats am I wearing, right?
Right.
But some of the questions that we want to ask you, and I know our time is brief, deals a little bit with church, local church ministry, and as a staff member or as a senior pastor, dealing with this idea of young people, or getting your congregation to be young or relevant, current might be another word to use. So I just want to throw this out to you. Many churches and ministries go through cycles. Of course, we're all familiar with those cycles. I think they grow. Many of them flatline. They start off young and vibrant. There's a lot of energy in the beginning. Even some of our church plants, you get that energy, but then eventually it's like, wow, who are we now? What are we doing? And eventually they grow old or older and become irrelevant and sometimes even ineffective. And so I've heard you say that churches age and churches die, but intentional leadership can make that divine journey, and that's pretty profound, that divine journey significantly longer and much more spiritually productive. And so the question I want to ask you based on that is, how can a pastor or a ministry leader keep their church or ministry young and alive and vibrant, even though the chronological aging process continues?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think several things. One of the ones I don't have sometimes enough time to talk about, but we'll throw it in here, is I think the leader, the pastor, needs to stay young at heart. And to stay young at heart, to learn to think young, to be around young leaders, but to stay young at heart, keep thinking young, keep driving toward the younger side of life. That's certainly not taking away from the importance of experience. We need that. Wisdom is great, but think young, stay young. So from that point, I think there's probably three things that are really important in terms of helping to keep your church young. And the first is your children's ministry. So we can go really practical.
Yeah.
No doubt it's about a divine partnership. No doubt it's God's covering. It's God's favor. But let's go practical, because that's how God allows us to operate. I think the first is your children's ministry. That's got to be top notch, to make that, put a premium emphasis on your children's ministry, not childcare, not just an afterthought, not the leftover leaders, but top resources, great energy, great vision, seeing the future in the kids. We almost get excited sometimes when parents will tell us that their kids will cry if the parents don't bring them to church on Sunday. That's how much they want to go.
That's a win, yeah.
That's a win. Another one, and I'll just kind of go brief on a few thoughts, and if you want to jump back in, that'd be great. Another one is your Sunday morning worship. That you've got to keep that with a relevant feel. You want to keep that alive, and I'm going to go back and say keep it young. One of the best ways you can keep a young, relevant feel to your worship experience is having young people on the stage. Now, again, that doesn't mean you can't have us old guys up there. That's okay. You can do that. There's good experience and good wisdom. But if you don't also see young musicians, young worship leaders, young communicators, young prompters, young people up there, the church begins to age unnecessarily. From music to tech to humor to video. Keep it young, keep it relevant in the culture. We're so used to HD and stuff, and if it just doesn't look that way, that the audience checks out. So let me just give you one more. Invest in the next generation. If we start with, stay young at heart, think young. And we say, raise up a great children's ministry. That helps keep your church young, and keep the stage, keep the platform young, youthful on the platform on Sundays. The last one is invest in the next generation. We're so passionate about that here, and I think most churches are. But you've got to pour energy in from your middle school, your high school, pouring into the student life of the church, raising up young leaders. Maybe you have an internship. Hiring young staff, that's a key issue, is hiring young staff. We have so many 20-somethings, 30-somethings. I'm by far the oldest on staff. I'm from the Jurassic era, but that's okay, because we so deeply believe in having young staff, young leaders pouring into the next generation in very tangible ways. We need not be frightened from lack of experience. The truth is, they are the future. The young staff, they might not be experienced, but they have vision, creativity, they have ideas, they get it. Our generation, we're to hand them the keys and train them up. They are the future.
Right. Those 3 points are amazing and very practical. So from your experience, how do you, because it sounds like you've created that culture at 12 Stone. So whether you're a small church or a large church, medium-sized church, whatever it's the ministry, even within a family, you're creating this culture.
Right.
So how have you intentionally created this culture? You mentioned children's ministry. Like, who makes that decision? How does everyone buy into it? There's no division. You might have discussion, brainstorming, but how have you created that culture?
Well, really, that culture comes from essentially a developmental culture.
Okay.
Where we start with developmental, meaning we start with a leadership culture that's developmental in nature. So that's what pulls us all together. When we're constantly pouring, we call it the 2X factor, by the way, pouring twice as much in as we expect back out. And so as we pour leadership in large groups and discussion groups, and we, everything's built on this quite simple foundation, but it really works. Get a group, pick a book, ask 2 questions.
Yeah.
Meaning literally gather up a group, young leaders, established leaders, potential leaders, pick a leadership book, and ask 2 questions. What are you learning, and how are you applying what you learn? But this constant developmental culture, where we're pouring in, investing, and then what we do is we actually talk about vision and talk about dream, talk about the next generation, talk about reaching Jesus. Reaching people for Jesus? What's the best way we can do that? And so if there are tensions or questions, it's so much better to work those out in a culture where people feel like you're investing in them and pouring in them rather than taking from them.
Yeah.
A lot of times, a lot of times churches, honestly, they want more from you than they want to give to you. And so in a developmental culture, we want to give more, we want more for them than we want from them. And when you do that, the people are so much more likely to be inspired to go after the vision together, to be unified together.
Right. Yeah. So they're willing to, even as staff, you're willing to sacrifice maybe your own department or ministry and mission or vision, knowing that this is much bigger, broader than me, or even my staff.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Definitely. That's awesome. Let me ask you another question. You make a point that it's important for leadership, for the leadership of the church, the elders, leadership teams, pastoral teams, to focus on the mission. This kind of goes along with what we were just talking about, which is to reach the lost. So it's not just about how do we create our own environments, but how do we actually, kind of the mandate of going out, reaching the lost. So you state, if you reach the next generation, other generations will follow, which is pretty, it sounds simple, but actually living that out, especially depending on who's, I would say, in power or who holds the power. So if you reach the next generation, other generations will follow. In what ways have you seen this played out within your own ministry experience, whether it was at even back at Skyline, 12 Stone, other places, and how have you been intentional in staying focused on that mission?
Well, I give you a couple of things that are recent, intentional. I'll be quite candid with you. In fact, we were looking at, about 3 years ago, looking at our leadership team and seeing that everybody in senior leadership were in their 40s and 50s. And while that's not bad, we said, you know what? We are not going to be that church, because we're going to blink and we're all going to be in our 60s someday. And so we have intentionally been hiring and promoting and raising up very, very young leaders into very significant, weighty, meaty jobs. And also the same with our volunteers, because sometimes your best staff are volunteers. So intentionally letting the young rising leaders, putting them in significant places of leadership. And I think that's a real significant thing. And secondly, I think as we continue to communicate the vision, communicate things like in a student ministry. Here's another practical example. In a student ministry, obviously we're fired up about students getting saved, getting baptized, serving, but we're also looking for and emphasizing and cheering on and modeling seeing kids called to full-time ministry from that young age up, and celebrating that into and through our college years, into and through an internship, a residency process, so that the entire church sees, yes, it's about the mission, it's about reaching people for Jesus, it's about seeing them lives changed and people baptized and people growing in Christ. But if what we know about it, and you do too, is the nature of the church will decline and age and shut down if we don't keep it young.
Mm-hmm. Yep, definitely. And you mentioned earlier, I think, that the older generations will follow.
Oh yeah,
it's natural, and now being a parent of 4 kids, I focus on my kids and I will follow whatever helps them develop.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, what you're gonna say. You're fine.
Yeah. That point there, it's true. It never works in reverse.
Right, right.
That the young they don't naturally follow after and seek after, unless the moment that they find that the older generations are really all about them and do want to empower them and do want to hand the keys off. There's a gravitation, there's a partnership. But if you lean into the young, if you lean into the next gen, we've experienced, you mentioned Skyline in San Diego, and here in every church I've been in that does that the older generations love to follow. It's like, grandkids, where do the grandparents want to be? They want to be around the kids.
Yep.
Where do the parents want to be? They want to hang out with the cool young kids. Right. And so we always see that migration to a really healthy sort of generational picture, but the kids lead the way. The young ones always lead the way.
Right. Practical question for you on that note, especially when it comes to someone giving up their leadership, and maybe giving up's not, maybe it's just transferring, or it's a different type of leading.
Yeah, transition. Yeah.
Transition. Yeah. How does a person that would be considered older, or that wants to hand that off, right?
Yeah, that's right.
How does that happen? Because someone who's trying to lead in that way, whether it's a board member or there's the stronghold within a local congregation or ministry, it's like we want to happen. The culture is ready, it's ripe, it's ready to go, but we still have these people that are gripping on tight. What are maybe some practical tips or some things that you've seen of how to engage in that somewhat messiness?
Yeah, it is a messy thing, and to be really honest, again, staying really candid, the boomers have a lot of power and authority, and the millennials want some.
Yep.
But when there is, and it needs to be transferred, it absolutely must be transferred. So the whole idea of empowerment has to be based on mission, and the underlying thing that actually makes it work is trust. Both generations have to trust each other, and there has to be an intentional handing off where the older generations, the ones who are currently leading, they trust that the young ones will give their whole heart and be all in, because they're handing off legacy.
Right. Yep.
But the young ones have to trust that the older ones have their best interest in heart, and they will actually hand the keys over and let go of the keys. It only breaks down when the boomers, so to speak, hold on and won't let go because they don't trust the young ones, and the younger ones won't honor the previous generation. But when the older ones, us older guys will trust and hand the keys, and the younger ones honor the older ones and look for the wisdom and insight, oh my gosh, it's powerful. I mean, what happens is powerful, and that empowering thing in that transition really works, and it's really fun, because here's what I'll tell you. There's plenty of work for all of us to do. There's plenty to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's almost this transition, but also this transformation that happens even within the leadership team. Within that transformation process of transitioning, like you said, you begin to see more of your place within the kingdom movement versus just kind of my area. Would you say that's accurate?
That's really accurate. It's a bigger picture. It's a kingdom thing. It's a local church, big C, capital C, the big church idea. We often say, here, don't worry so much about trying to get picked for what you want to do. Why don't you just do what you get asked to do? Why don't you do what someone chose you to do? Do what someone picked you to do, and if you will serve well and rise up in that, you'll end up getting to do all the things you dreamed about. But it's when you kind of fight to rise up, that empowerment, that transition we're talking about, when you try to fight your way up on the one side, that's what erodes it. Or on the other side, if they won't let the keys go, it's both sides have to do the give and take together. Right. So, but it works awesome when they do.
Right. That's powerful. That's great. Well, as you know, this is being broadcasted live, and so we have people asking questions online in the kind of chat room. And so there's a few questions I want to throw out to you that have come from our chat room. So here's one question from a pastor. It says, a church wants to start a separate worship service for teens. Any advice on how to move forward with that? You mentioned kind of getting young people on the platform, things like that, but a church that wants to do that with worship, wants to start a separate worship service. Any advice on how to move forward with that?
Well, I think that the leadership has to be aligned with the first question of why do you want to do that? What's the motivation? Because if the motivation is, well, we think the church is irrelevant and our worship service is irrelevant, we don't like it, it's not any good, that's not a good reason to start. That's not a good platform to launch that out. But if it feels more like this, well, we just want to have a midweek worship gathering and event for students, and we love what happens on Sunday mornings, then you've really got more of a partnership happening rather than a siloed separation. So I think it can be a good thing, but start with why, and then make sure that the young leaders and the students still feel like the Sunday experience is a great one, and this is additive. Listen, additive, not escaping. Okay. Yeah. Does that help?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Good.
Yeah, I think the question is why. Always asking that, like, why is this necessary? Is there a different direction?
Approach, a different solution? Exactly.
Right. Yep, definitely.
And how does it help the big picture?
Yep, does another worship service actually fulfill that mission? Does it get us closer to fulfilling that mission, or? Yep.
Or you're just doing your own thing, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Right.
Another question that came to us is, what can a pastor do? You mentioned the young heart. So what can a pastor do to keep himself or herself young at heart in their free time? I know sometimes as a pastor, you have that profession. You always wear that pastor hat.
Yeah.
There's also the personal side too. So kind of in their free time, how do they keep motivated, current, those type of things?
I'll tell you what I do, and it's really just one thing. I constantly get around and spend time with young adults. My kids are 26 and 25. They're 21 months apart, but one of them just had a birthday. So it's right now they're 26, 25. So I'm around 20-somethings all the time because all their friends are 20-something. I purposely engage and go hang out with the 20-somethings and 30-somethings on staff because I learn from them. They keep me young. You find out literally what they watch on TV and what music and they'll say different things, and I'll have to say, what does that mean?
Right.
I remember the first time, a long time back now, but I remember the first time somebody said, yeah, we need a hack for that. I said, a what? And they said, a hack. I said, what's a hack?
Yeah.
But see, if you'll set the pride aside and jump in and let the young ones teach us, that's for me anyway, how I stay young at heart, is I just spend a lot of time with young adults.
Yeah.
Yep.
You're right, and I think the young adults, they want that.
I think so.
Yeah, they want that wisdom, the experience, also just what I would say mentoring.
Yeah.
And so with that said, another question from a pastor said, what are 3 keys to mentoring 20-something leaders? And I know with 12 Stone, you have other staff members too that are doing like internships. But I know for you, especially the size church that you are, and knowing some of the people on your staff, you're very intentional with the mentoring, both at a professional level as well all the way down to lay people, in terms of investing, in terms of the spiritual formation that you guys are intentional about is significant. So give you props for that, because at church your size, sometimes you don't necessarily have to. You can as many people as you want, and people wouldn't even notice. But you guys are very intentional in developing people. So this question I know means a lot to you. So how do you mentor those young people, whether in their teens, 20s, even early 30s?
Yeah, I think one of the important things is to listen. We're always moving fast. We're all under pressure. We got lots of things to do, and so sometimes we tend to mentor by telling. I think we mentor better by listening and learning to ask really good questions. One of the things I've learned over the years is, because I'm a talker, I have lots of passion, I'm a coach, and I used to really make a dumb mistake. I would answer questions people weren't asking. and I know that sounds dumb, but I was dumb. And so I've learned to stop answering questions that people aren't asking. And so by listening and encourage and letting the questions bubble up, now you get on their agenda. So if you're listening and you're on your agenda, now you have a shot to actually mentor and coach. Second, I think, because you asked for 3 things, so of course we have to. I would make them alliterate, but I don't think I could do it that fast.
You can do it if you want. Yeah, that's right.
I'll try. Is give them responsibility. Trust them with responsibility. If they're leaders, volunteer leaders, paid leaders, trust them with something significant. Trust them with something meaningful. That makes the coaching and mentoring come alive because now there's something to actually connect with. Then I think third, make it personal. So it's not just about the leadership skills, which are extremely important, but make it personal by talking about who they are as a person, their self-awareness, what they understand about life, how things are going on at home. Because if that personal element, their walk with God, how they hear from God, if that stuff isn't working, all the leadership skills in the world really aren't going to help them much.
Yep, powerful. And it sounds like each of those 3 things, there's this investment of time.
Yeah.
And I know, again, mentioned that knowing some of your leadership team at 12 Stone, that you're innovative. Things change, they evolve. So you just don't say, this is it, we've made it. But you continue to say, okay, we're doing this better. You evaluate, you do the process. But it seems like a lot of those processes always comes back to that relationship. How are we impacting the life of the person? So it's not the person serving the program, but how is the program actually serving the needs of the people.
That's right.
And so that's very powerful. Well, because of time, I'm going to ask you this one last question, and it comes from Connie Stewart, and it's about the children's ministry. You mentioned earlier about children's ministry being a priority, which is phenomenal. Again, I think you mentioned don't just give our leftovers, just kind of a warm body or someone just to kind of teach a lesson,
Right.
but who's someone who loves kids and children, who's investing in our young people. I mean, you look at their school systems and how much money is poured into our education system, into our colleges, universities, and how society puts a lot of stock in our kids, which makes sense when you're talking about investing. And the church needs to do the same. Connie mentions, how do you start a children's ministry if you don't have any children, is the question.
Well, I think obviously you want to have children's, but I would say this: start your children's ministry if you don't have kids the same way you'd plant a church. When you plant a church, there's no people anywhere, so you literally begin to do things in the community, and you start a Bible study, so forth and so on, to begin to bring adults and families into the church. So I would do the very same thing. Find some. Whether it's in a local school system or in the community where there are ways to connect with families, bring in the moms and dads, get connected with moms and dads, literally just go out in the community, meet people, make friends, get a small core of people, do some really fun things. Start with events. You wouldn't start with Sunday morning by Sunday morning by Sunday morning, but start with some fun events, maybe once a week, maybe once a month, whatever you can do. And show that you've got some really cool things to offer kids. And then as you begin to, like church planting, gathering up a smaller crowd of families and kids and more families and kids who are participating, then when you get a nucleus that you feel is significant, you could actually begin to launch that in on a Sunday morning. So think of it like a church plant, but go out there and bring families and kids in.
Right. So be very intentional. Also understand the timing, the development, the long-term goal of those steps.
Of what you're doing.
What you're doing, yep. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking time. Man, this time flew by, and there's a lot more questions that I'd love to ask you. But again, thank you so much for being here with us and taking time out to talk with us, your wisdom and insight. How can people find you online, whether it's a blog or Twitter? How can they connect with you?
Yeah, you can go to my blog site is danreiland.com, and Twitter is the same thing, @DanReiland. Just love to connect with you, love to have you follow. You can subscribe to my blog, danreiland.com, and I write at least twice a week on leadership, and if you want to kind of surf around on there, you'll find lots and lots and lots of helpful articles and posts. At least I hope you do.
Yeah, they're good. Yeah.
So there it is.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, and appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Tony and Heath, tell us what's up next.